Welcome. Reed McManigle is from Carnegie Mellon University, one of the world's greatest universities. A family favorite. Two of my nephews have degrees from Carnegie Mellon, so I have personal affiliation there. I was not good enough to get into CMU, so I didn't go there. But later on, I went to MIT, so I made up for it, I think. Anyway, and also it's one of my favorite cities in the world as well, Pittsburgh. We were just talking about that earlier. Reed is a lawyer and an MBA. He has a very interesting job. His title is Mentor in Residence at the Center for Technology Transfer and Enterprise Creation at Carnegie Mellon. His job is to help the formation and growth of companies based on the massive IP and research and development that happens across campus, across all disciplines, whether it's computer science or robotics or bio engineering and so on. So that's a really remarkable job, and I think Carnegie Mellon has a very interesting model for how to create companies and so on out of their IP, and there's some interesting things there which I'm sure Reed might get into. We have a partnership of sorts with Carnegie Mellon and through Reed and Reed's office. So we're delighted to have you here. Last time around, we featured the 5G Open Innovation Lab and Jim, who talked about what they do. That's a incubator that is sponsored by Microsoft. So we're an excellent company here. And so thank you, Reed, for sharing some of your time with us, and tell us a little bit about the stuff that's happening there, and your role and things of that nature. We already are looking at some of the companies that you mentioned to us in our current pipeline here, but let's get to understand the ecosystem that you're in charge of over the next 20-30 minutes.
Shyam, thank you for that very kind introduction, and thanks to you and Oscar for inviting me, giving me this chance to talk to all of you. I'm keeping my eye on the clock here and recognizing that we don't have a lot of time before your company presentation. So I'm going to go quickly because I really want to allow time for questions. So as Shyam said, I work in the Technology Transfer Office. My role is to help faculty and PhD students create and grow startup companies. He also mentioned we're in Pittsburgh, beautiful shot of Pittsburgh. Doesn't look like this today. The point where the fountain is underwater. It's a flood condition in Pittsburgh today. This is our campus, one view of it in the foreground. In the center ground, the really tall building is University of Pittsburgh, and in the background is downtown. See how close all these things are, and that leads to a lot of close working relationships and collaborations on research, education, and also tech transfer between CMU and Pitt. I won't go into all of these, but I'll just say CMU is very well known for computer science and robotics, engineering. But we also have a very good school of drama that may or may not be known to you. We're also very good in energy, materials, and life sciences. That isn't really shown in these ranking kind of things. We have 7 different schools of the university. Office supports all 7 of these. So one of the things I want to talk about is the role that CMU has played, the role that our office has played, the role that CMU research has played in making Pittsburgh into a tech city, in a sense, transitioning from the downfall of the steel and glass industry in the 1980s. So you can see a lot of these sort of name brand companies on this map. One of the interesting things is a lot of these are either spinouts of CMU or Pitt, or former spinouts that were acquired by these large companies. And I've been working in technology transfer, technology-based economic development in Pittsburgh since the 80s. And back in the day, we would help a company get launched, and if they would raise money from outside or get acquired from outside, they would tell them, you have to move out of Pittsburgh. That's no place for a growth company. But now when they get acquired, these outside companies say, we want you to stay in Pittsburgh because that is a good place to find talent, lower cost of operations, and on the coast. So how does this happen? So it's a network. It's not just tech transfer. It's not just research, but we work a lot with other organizations. So we're here in the Technology Transfer Office. I'm going to talk about Tech Transfer Office or Technology Licensing Office. I'm also going to talk about our sister organization, the Schwartz Center for Entrepreneurship. But then we work a lot with other organizations in Pittsburgh that are economic development organizations, generalist or sector specific, or investors or networking organizations and so on. So it's this very strong network of individuals and organizations working together to make that prior map occur. So I'm going to talk a lot about the Tech Transfer Office, Center for Technology Transfer, Enterprise Creation, and the Schwartz Center for Entrepreneurship. So within the Tech Transfer Office, we're all about university-owned IP. That's our whole mission, is like, how do we get that IP out to where it can be helpful to society? So we only work on things where CMU owns IP. Our IP policy says we own inventions that come out of funded research. So generally that's faculty and PhD students. We have the sister organization, Schwartz Center for Entrepreneurship, that is all about entrepreneurship. And they don't care about IP ownership. So they work with everybody. They work with undergraduates, master's students, faculty, PhDs, and even alumni who are working on startups. They're very educational. They have entrepreneurs in residence. They have pitch competitions and so on. Where CTTEC is very transactional. We're filing patent applications. We're negotiating licenses. We're managing things and doing deals. So with that background, looking at the Tech Transfer Office, our process starts generally with an invention. We get an invention disclosure. We have some processes of evaluating that and trying to decide what should we do with this particular technology. And sometimes that's licensing to an existing company. Sometimes it's setting up a company not with any long-term intent other than move it to the next development stage to get it to a point where somebody else will want it, because they generally don't want it at the stages coming out of university. Sometimes there is an intent that this company is going to get legs and grow, raise venture capital and so on. It's not just a development house. But we do a lot of stuff to support our faculty in doing open science, open software, and see that as part of our mission. Just get this stuff out there to where it can be helpful. So it isn't all for us about making money. It's about get the results research out to benefit society. So this is getting kind of stale data, but just will give you a sense of how we compare on our key metrics compared to national averages. So a couple things here. If you look at how many disclosures we get per research dollar, we have a very active and engaged faculty. We get a lot of invention disclosures for the size of university, size of research budget. We do a lot of deals, and we do a lot of startups. So we do more startups per research dollar than MIT or Stanford or most of the universities that you're thinking are the best at tech transfer. And that's even just counting the ones where we own IP. We're not counting the ones where we don't own IP, which is twice the volume. So just to give you some sense of statistics, we form about 10 startups per year. That's our benchmark. Sometimes we're a little over, sometimes we're a little under, but we're sort of expected to do 10 startups a year. And our companies have raised close to $4 billion since 2010. And about 70% of them that were formed since 2010 are still in business or acquired. And we've had some notable unicorns, Duolingo, everybody's probably familiar with, Shield AI, maybe not so familiar. We've had some SPACs, reverse mergers, and so on, and a bunch of exits. So one of the interesting things about CMU is how broadly distributed the entrepreneurial bug is in the university. So I think if you look at a lot of universities that are doing startups, there's a few number of departments where everything's coming from. But you can see in CMU, like it's spread all over the university. It's just ingrained into the culture now, and it's ingrained throughout the hierarchy of the university. If there's some policy question about what do we do with this situation, the people making the interpretations up throughout the chain of command have had a startup. The provost has had a startup, vice president of research, the president of the university. So it's ingrained into the university. So I'm transitioning now to talk about how we help startups. But first, I want to talk about what the problems are and challenges that we're addressing. So I have a couple slides on that. So this slide, I put together originally for faculty, why would they ever think of doing that? And one of the reasons for even having a conversation is faculty are overwhelmed. Like they're supervising students, they're writing research papers, they're on faculty committees, they're editors of journals, they're hustling for money. And then we say, why don't you do this impossible thing of starting up a new company? So why would they do that? One is to have some impact. Often if they just like publish a research paper, that's the end of it. And the impact doesn't happen in society that they might have intended. There are some situations, it's rare in truth, where people can make some good money from this. Some of the faculty are interested in it because they learn new things. They're a curious lot to begin with, and you give them a chance to learn new things, they get all excited about that. And in some cases, they're motivated on behalf of their students because it presents an alternative career path for their students, where traditionally they might have gone from CMU PhD to being a professor somewhere or working in a large company. This gives them a chance to have a different career path, work in startups. So one of the challenges, often the biggest challenge is this first one is, who's going to run this thing? The faculty members generally not going to give up their day job. Maybe they do some consulting on the side, but they're very busy and they're not leaving. The students may have other career paths, ideas, may have visa issues. So like often we don't even know on day one, like who's running this. So I had a meeting this morning with a professor. He's like, hey, I want to learn about how to form a startup. Like, well, let's talk about your student. Do you have any students that's interested? Because they're the ones that we need to focus on. They're going to be the ones that help get the technology out into a startup. And if there isn't a student, often the technology will just sit on the lab, sit on the shelf for a long, long time. The other two bullets here are sort of related, is like the end point of academic research is not a product or even a prototype, it's knowledge. So going from some research result, some laboratory result that allows you to get a PhD can be very far from being a company, that can get a customer. And if we would try to license something at that stage to a large company, they would say, we're not interested at this stage. We don't take technical risks. Show that you can make this into a product, get some customers, then we'll just acquire your company. So how do we deal with that? So we have a whole bunch of programs and approaches within CMU to work on these issues. So on the one hand, one of the big issues is limited business skills. We're dealing with faculty who maybe never have worked in a company and PhD students who've never maybe worked other than in a lab at a university. So we have a couple parallel approaches. One is to increase the skills of those scientists, and the other is to match them with outside mentors and outside entrepreneur co-founders. And then as they're exploring this, one of the big challenges often is their technology can be used for many different things. And it was designed, research in sort of a vacuum without really knowing what the real world problem is. And then they have this technology in search of a solution, in search of a market. So we help them in various ways to try to find that product market fit. One of the big mechanisms there is the I-Core customer discovery approach. But then we also have entrepreneurs in residence within the Schwartz Center. We have a lot of workshops about doing customer discovery. We have an accelerator program. We have a PhD student fellowship program where we coach them for a year. And then we have some internal funding programs through our office. We help them go after SBIR funding. We help access to angels, to venture capitalists, to corporates. We have a prize pitch competition. Then we have space. We allow startups to incubate in the lab of the founders as part of our licensing deal, or we have co-working space on campus, or we have outside, we have a directory of outside spaces. So that's sort of my high-level overview. One more slide just to say that we have a standardized approach to doing licensing that makes it kind of low friction to do a spin-off license with CMU. So traditionally, every university doing a startup license or any license, like every deal is different. And it can take months and months and months of like battles where each professor says, I'm special. I need the most special deal you've ever done. And then there's tension and it takes a long time and people hate each other, and that's a bad way of doing business. So we've been doing a standardized approach to licensing since 2004. So I'm going to pause there. I have additional slides to talk about all these different programs, if any of them are particularly of interest, but mostly I want to hear what your questions are. I'm even going to stop sharing screen just to see where we go from here.
I can get started.
I think first of
Jose.
all, I want to say this is very impressive what you set up, right? Because you're addressing all the typical barriers from idea to true entrepreneurship, right? And I think it's just awesome to have this thing. The one question I have, like over the years, right, and now investment climate and ideas which actually get money have changed quite a bit. What changes are you seeing in terms of what ideas, in terms of technology sources, and also what kind of founder profiles get more traction than before?
Yeah, so I'd say in terms of technologies, CMU has been known for artificial intelligence. Before that was sort of common parlance in the world. We've been known for robotics before robotics started taking over the world. So a lot of investors will reach out to us and say, hey, I invest in AI and robotics. I know you're CMU. What do you have? So it's been a little more challenging for us to get visibility for all of our like energy, climate tech kind of things, our life sciences and so on. But we have some really good work in those areas. So I'd say that those are kind of up and coming areas that you wouldn't necessarily think about CMU. So we've built up a network now over the last 8 years or so of about 450 investors that I communicate with on a somewhat regular basis. We have this master list of all of our startups and our pipeline of things that we're working on. And I periodically send that out to everybody, generally in the context of marketing for some upcoming event. So we help to organize various venture fairs throughout the year. We're doing one on campus in the energy space that we've been doing for a bunch of years. We collaborate with a local economic development group to do an AI and robotics one. We do a regional Three Rivers Venture Fair. So I'm communicating with a lot of investors. So in some sense, the climate is changing. It's tougher to get money, but we have a larger pool of investors that we're in touch with. So that balances out somewhat. In Pittsburgh, we don't have a lot of indigenous investment money. There's some like economic development kind of programs. You can get sort of, a couple $100,000 here or there. And then there's sort of a gap. There's a couple of relatively small funds formed in the last couple of years. But we're really relying on money coming in from outside the region to fuel our companies. So I don't know if I answered your question. Was there some part of that I didn't get to?
Thank you. No, absolutely. I want to leave room for others to ask questions.
Oh, you asked about like founders. So as I said, like the key thing that we try to do is like make sure the student, the graduating PhD student is in the conversation, because without that person, stuff just tends to sit on the shelf. The other thing we're doing is we're spending a lot more effort on trying to find outside entrepreneurs to partner with our scientists. And that's been sort of ad hoc in some ways, but then we also participate in some matchmaking programs that are more structured. One of them is through a National Renewable Energy Lab, another is through DARPA. So finding out entrepreneurs is one of my goals in every conversation. Like find that early money, find that entrepreneur to partner with the scientist, and get that PhD student roped in.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Just
I
a quick
have a quick
question.
question.
Sorry, go ahead, Jose.
Oh, that's okay.
No, please go ahead.
Okay. Reid, I'm very impressed by Carnegie Mellon, and I actually had the pleasure of working with Howie chose it for a bit when one of his startups a long time ago on a snake robot for medical purposes. And actually, my question is more about medical stuff. And do you do anything specifically to facilitate medical devices? Do you work with like EPMC or groups like that? Do you have a relationship with them?
Yes. So yeah, how we chose it is an entrepreneurial machine. He's working on 3 startups right now, in addition to the one that you mentioned before. And he already has another one out there. So he's a machine. Yeah, so in the life sciences area, we collaborate with Pitt on the research level a lot. We also are working with and expanding our relationship with UPMC Enterprises, which is the investment side of UPMC. There are 2 local life sciences accelerator kind of programs that sort of work in series. Innovation Works, which is our local Ben Franklin organization, has a software accelerator, Alpha Lab, a hardware accelerator, Alpha Lab Gear, Alpha Lab Health for health sciences, and now Robotics Factory. So they have 4 different accelerator programs, one of which is life sciences. And then there's also Life X, which is a sort of accelerator program spun out of Pitt. So we work with both of them sort of in parallel and tandem in series to like help to find entrepreneurs, to help to get that first funding, to help to do customer discovery and mentoring. So it's a big area of focus for us. And we do always have medical device companies in our pipeline and our portfolio.
That's great. Thank you.
Let me
I think
jump
we
in.
could do one more question.
Let me jump in 1 second. Jose is actually a chief product officer for a company that grew out of MIT in medical devices. So it's an interesting juxtaposition for you. You might want to touch base with them at some point to see how that relationship works and how that thing happened. I'm sure you'll have an interesting conversation. I just wanted to ask you, Reed, as to how you differ from perhaps the Stanfords and the MITs of the world in terms of how you do things. I think the one crucial difference is clearly both of these other 2 universities happen to be located in, very sort of hotbeddy areas for entrepreneurship and venture capital and the like. And you guys are sort of in Pittsburgh, where, as you, to your own reckoning, said that there's not enough local capital there. So how are you different, and what have you done to sort of distinguish yourself and so on? Everybody knows Carnegie Mellon, obviously, but you've probably done some interesting things to distinguish yourself from these other 2 giants.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we do that maybe is a little different, and it's because we're in Pittsburgh, we have to try harder. I think that we work maybe more closely with our local economic development community. That one of those slides I had up showing all the different relationships we have. My sense is that they're much more on their own. They don't need those organizations because their indigenous, investment and entrepreneurship community is so much stronger just natively than ours. So we as a region have to work together and try harder more than they do. Some things that they do are stupendous. Like we're really jealous of the MIT Engines program. They have like $450 million fund. We don't really have a fund. I think that we were ahead of them in terms of doing a standardized license deal to make that more frictionless. And I think one of the things is we are a smaller sized university, so it's possible to like have a holistic view of almost everything that's going on. Like if you tried to have the conversation with Stanford, like tell me about all startups, how many people would you have to talk to? Whereas at CMU, like you talk to me and I can tell you about all of our startups. I think it's just a more knowable, approachable kind of scale.
Actually, believe it or not, when we were looking around for partnerships, that's exactly what we thought, which is, we don't want to go off and ally with Stanford or MIT. We pick a university which is smaller but equally prestigious and has a terrific reputation for creating the right kind of intellectual capital, and we should partner with those guys. And that's kind of how we thought about it. It's interesting you mentioned that the same thing. So that's
Yeah, that's affirmative. Great. Thank you.
yeah.